Well, have we had our AV miracle in the room at Popple? Can anyone say something that I can hear from the room? Oh, they're gone. All right. They're back. Someone's holding a microphone. That's a good sign. I don't hear it yet. Okay, so they hear us. That's better than nothing. Benjamin, do you want me to kick things off here with the first talk? All right, so I'm being directed to get our second session started, and we are going to be hearing first from Jim about a visual debugger. Go ahead, Jim.
Great, thanks. It's just a little bit past sunrise here in California. Today I'm going to talk about visual Ltac debugger that I've implemented in CoqIDE. So I will start with a demo and then talk a bit about a number of planned improvements and then share a final closing thought. Okay, you see that?
We see it.
Great. Okay, so I have a short Ltac tactic here, and I'm going to use a function key to set a breakpoint on that ID tac, and then I will run the program. So we've stopped before executing the ID tac B. If you look in the messages panel, we've already printed the A, and you see we have a call stack down below. And variables that are defined in the top frame are C and con, which are here and here. So pretty conventional, very similar to what you would have for other programming languages. I should mention this is in Coq 8.15. It needs some polishing, but I think it's already quite useful as it is. The GUI is well described in the Coq documentation, so you don't need to think about taking detailed notes. And feedback is welcome on what's been implemented and as well as what I'm planning. So then the usual set of stepping operations, continue, single step, step in and step out. Let's see. So one of the first steps for implementing the debugger was to port the coqtop command line debugger to the messages panel. So I can actually type commands here, and for example, enter is the same as step. This is something that's probably going to go away fairly soon. I don't think it's really very usable. Okay, if you're in a top level script and you say you edit the file, which is going to move the offset of the breakpoints, we will still operate. Whoops. We'll still hit the break. Let's do it one more time. We'll still hit the breakpoints correctly. So that's very intuitive behavior. One essential thing is currently you need to set this option, set Ltac debug, for the debugger to be active. In the future, we'll probably do something to make that a little bit more seamless. You don't want to be having to add that to your scripts. That's not always convenient. Now I want to show you a I want to show you the case where you have a multi-file script. And in this case, with the current user interface, the best thing to do is to detach the debugger window. Okay. Detach the debugger window so you can see things better as you move from file to file. So for example, I'm now at a breakpoint in a different file. I'm in this other file, reify, and I can navigate through the stack. But the two windows is very, for now, it's important if you're going to do something with multiple files. And unlike the single file case, if you want to edit your secondary script, in other words, the one, not the top level script, but something that's being called, you have to go through a step of recompiling and then reloading the script. This is fairly usual for programming language debuggers as well. Okay. Okay. Now I want to talk about some planned improvements. First question many people may have is, what about support in other debuggers, in other IDEs such as VS-Coq or Coqtail or Proof General? This is not work I plan to do myself, but I think it would be great to see this work used there as well. The CoqIDE uses an XML protocol to communicate with Coq. VS-Coq and Coqtail also use this XML protocol. There are 6 additional messages. That part should not be a burden on those IDEs. On the other hand, Proof General, the released version does not use XML, so they would have a bit more work. And it is possible to support a completely different protocol. For example, if you wanted to support debugger access protocol, which is from the VS-Coq universe, that is possible, though more work. Each IDE would need to do some GUI development, of course, but the server-side code changes should be shareable. I think people are interested in seeing support for Ltac 2. This requires server-side changes. It should be very similar to Ltac. One interesting use case is that Ltac 2 can call Ltac and vice versa. So we'd like to be able to show a unified stack with both Ltac and Ltac 2 stack frames. And this may be a common use case as people start to use Ltac 2 more. They're very likely to call libraries that are still in Ltac. A more interesting case is we'd like to provide support for debugging term reduction, such as done by tactics like CBV. These can do a lot of computation, and currently we don't have good ways of debugging that. The implementation, the design challenge is we don't have source code. All we have is a term. So, we use source code to place breakpoints, and we rely on different tactic definitions for defining stack frames. So we need to think of something a little different for that. The best idea so far is that a breakpoint might correspond to the delta expansion of a definition. So you put a breakpoint, set a breakpoint by name, or perhaps click on the definition, something along those lines. And then the stack might be interpreted as as you're expanding the expression, probably depth first. The things that you've expanded above in the tree would be on the stack until you complete that. So the plan for this is to prototype, experiment, get feedback, and make sure it's really a useful feature. We'd like to have support for history. So if you've gotten deep into some Ltac script, maybe it's run for a minute or two. Once you get to a stopping point, you might want to see what's before. So this is easy to do when you're not in Ltac, but for the debugger, we would take the approach of saving the proof context in the stack from the last n debugger steps, and then let users navigate that, go forward and backward. And we would probably support the not just single step forward and back, but also step in, step out, continue, and going backwards to breakpoints. The number of states you save is obviously going to, the more states you save, the more memory will be used. It's hard to know, it's hard to say at this point how much memory that will be used overall. It depends partly on the size of your contexts and the amount of sharing between them. Likely we would make that user configurable. Another thing people probably would like is if they've gotten deep into a script, suppose they have a failure, and they might want to experiment with different alternatives to get around their failure. And you'd like to be able to do that without having to recompile and then rerun the entire script for each experiment. That could be pretty tedious. So, I've thought about this a bit, but I don't have a specific implementation, a specific user experience to describe now. I think the user experience is one of the harder bits to figure out, and there probably would be some limitations. There's several items where we want to improve the information display. Currently, the context, we're displaying it. The context is not displayed the same in the debugger as outside the debugger. That's fairly straightforward change. Also, if you're outside the debugger and you change the printing options, for example, you turn on printing all, that will immediately change the format of the context. That's not working right now. Proof diffs are not shown in the debugger. These are all fairly straightforward. If your context has more than one goal, if you're not in Ltac, you can modify your script slightly to look at the second goal. But if you're in Ltac, modifying the script is not possible. So there should be a way to switch from goal 1 to goal 2 just to see what's going on. There are a number of options that are useful for debugging. For example, set debug auto. There's currently no way to set that from the GUI, and it's impossible. You can't put commands such as set debug auto into the middle of an Ltac script. So people would probably like to be able to run their script to a certain point and then turn on some of these options which probably will generate a good bit of output. For backtracking, this is one of the it's a very useful but also somewhat hard to follow feature of Ltac. So I'd like to do something to make it easier to follow what's happening with backtracking, and a couple ideas, but nothing to describe in detail now. For existential variables, I understand sometimes it's hard to tell whether an evar is instantiated in a script. we may address this by having a new kind of breakpoint that stops when a named evar is set. And there are a number of GUI refinements, better layout, and window management. The multi-file debugging is a little bit awkward right now. There's a good bit of polishing, little things that will make it to change to make the interface more consistent, easier to use. The edit build debug loop I would like to look at and make sure it's possible to efficiently edit and build and debug, whether you're editing and building inside or outside of CoqIDE. And the key assignments, when I experimented with it, it appeared there was no way to change the key assignments, and I think this is clearly needed because people work on different platforms. They have, for example, some people use Emacs, other people use other things. They'd like to be able to configure their key assignments. So I'd like to leave you with a closing thought that there's too much buggy software today. And I suggest some long-term goals for software verification should be, first, we should aim to reduce the effort required by 100-fold so verification can be widely applied. It's much too expensive right now. It can only be applied for a very few things. And second, we need to make it easy for average software engineers to learn and use verification. We will quickly run out of trained PhDs to do verification. So to achieve these goals, I think we need improvements to tools, libraries, techniques, and documentation. This is going to take time, years probably. Creating a visual debugger is one step. I'd like to hear what else is needed to move towards these goals. So thank you for listening, and I'd be glad to take some questions now.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, we have about 3 minutes for questions, and folks who are there in the physical room, please use AirMeet to submit your questions by text. And we can start, though, with an online question. Robert wants to know, what was the state of the art in Ltac debugging prior to this work?
There was a command line oriented debugger in coqtop. It had those few commands I showed briefly on the messages panel. I'd say very low functionality, not fun to use.
I can second that description. Okay, marking question as answered. We have a time for approximately one more question. Oh, here it comes. Oh, no, I'm being given information through the question mechanism. After the Q&A, let's take a 5-minute break. Fair enough. Would anyone like to add a last question, though? Okay, well, it sounds like we can start that 5-minute break right now. Thanks again for the presentation, Jim.
Great. Thanks, guys.
Oh, and I guess you could reply to this last comment about debugging unification, but probably folks in the room can't hear you because they're changing things around.
That's on the QA.
It's not
Yeah,
phrased as a question.
Well, yeah, I think I've not really looked at unification, but it would be kind of like probably be a bit like CBV.
Oh, and people in the room, we did hear you saying, "Can you hear us?" If that helps.
Yeah, potentially we could do something for unification, but that's, it'd be a little project like everything.
Mm-hmm. All right.